Hi, I'm Barry Zworstein. Since writing my book, Which Way Is Your Claymore Facing? An operational manual for veterans adjusting to civilian life, I've been really fortunate to have incredible conversations with organizations and people around the world who have shown a lot of interest in my book and what I have to say. Tomorrow I'm going to be talking to Joe Lara, who's in charge of programs for the Honor Foundation, which is an organization which trains and integrates SEALs into executive positions. Excuse the stutter. Um, what this brought to mind is the sense of homelessness that I see, and certainly there is lots of evidence all over the world with veterans, and certainly in the work I've done with veterans in this country, and this includes veterans right up to the Special Force community, how when they do transition out the military, some of them end up in manual jobs, struggling for work, struggling to cope with adjustments to civilian life. And the fact that there are so many homeless veterans, so many veterans who were and are incredibly trained, highly intelligent, but there are simply not enough transitional processes to allow these men and women to take on positions which are really in keeping with their skill set. And not necessarily the skill set around war, but it's a skill set around multitasking, leadership, reliability, dependability, teamwork. And I find that is a real tragedy. A further tragedy is also the organizations that are out there supposedly to help veterans with wounds, whether they're physical or psychological, and the numbers of veterans that eventually get to points of such desperation, battling bureaucracy, that they get to a point of taking their lives, or where the trauma is amplified even further. These instances are certainly what I'd call a moral injury, where the organizations that are supposed to transition you effectively into a healthy way of living have an opposite impact. So I guess this is something that awareness really needs to be brought to. Now, part of my reason for writing the book was because I felt it was critical that we provided veterans with opportunities to be able to heal themselves. My wife's staring at me. Oh dear, can't hide anywhere. Anyway, back to the topic. But the reason I actually wrote this book was because it felt important to me that something needed to be given to veterans in this transition process, that they could actually start to feel empowered. Tools, awarenesses, simple techniques that could create change. Now, I fully acknowledge that there's the arena or territory of profound trauma, or trauma at any certain level, and that is often very difficult to get to. Understandably, numbers of people that I've sat with are very, very resistant to approaching that trauma. And I have a philosophy, as I've said before, that I'm not sure it's in the best keeping of these veterans to throw them into the middle of trauma. I know there are modalities that do that, and that's cool. I have a philosophy where I think there are ways of approaching those ambush pieces of territory slowly and gently, so that there's a gradual processing as you get closer and closer to your core trauma, but in which you feel more and more comfortable and able to resolve and heal those parts of yourself. Now, what I often say to veterans is, if you've got your core ambush territory and you're simply not going to go there, well, think about, in the territory that this trauma exists, think about stepping back out onto the edges of this territory. Stand there and think about maybe one thing that you would be willing to work at. Create some distance. It's almost as if you turn the binoculars around and you're looking at something from a distance. So let's say, for example, a veteran had a really traumatic experience on an ambush, and really cannot go back there for the understandable feeling of getting to such a point of overwhelm that they're really worried about being able to come out of that. Well, go back 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 1 hour before the actual ambush. Move in slowly, move in imaginally slowly, as you get to a point where you can feel your upregulating emotions start to kick in, you can feel a certain amount of tension, stop. At that point, use certain tools to downregulate. When you back on your body, when your SUDs, your subjective units of distress, when they've lowered, you've acclimatized to existing in that piece of territory, take another step in, move in another 5 minutes, move in another 100 meters, and slowly move in till eventually you've processed your trauma without undue stress to you psychically, psychologically, or emotionally. Now, look, that's my preference. I guess one of the core things that I believe very strongly is when creating healing with veterans is to do no harm. And I'm not saying that the evidence-based modalities don't work. They certainly do. There's a lot of validity and research around numbers of these modalities, and I'm not here to argue about those. This is just my personal point of view, my perspective, and my approach. Now, when I thought about writing my book, I know that there are numbers of excellent books out there which go into a lot of detail about the warrior, the wounds, integrating into civilian life, and there's a huge amount of material. Now, two things for me came up. The one is I really didn't feel I had enough to actually say for a book that was half an inch thick, but I certainly felt I had enough to say for a little book. And so I started writing this little book. And the idea behind this little book was that I wanted something that a veteran or even a civilian, only recently with an organization in America, the feedback given to me by the executive assistant was, I'm not a veteran, I'm a civilian, and your book changed how I saw and understood trauma and veteran issues. Now, so I guess I wanted a book that could be read quite quickly. So it's something you could put in your backpack, in your back pocket, you could carry it with you. It has numbers of blank pages, so you could actually make notes. So it was something that you could use. You could imprint your thoughts, your feelings on the book, and that creates a sense of ownership. Then what I wanted to do was keep it very simple. So in my book, you'll see there's 13 lessons around navigating your way into civilian territory. And, these lessons were drawn from not just my own experiences operationally in the Rhodesian Bush War, but also my experiences as a marathon and ultramarathon runner, where, I was having to push my body well above where it wanted to, my mind wanted to, or emotionally I wanted to go. And so I created 13 lessons that, if these lessons are worked with, they equip veterans, and I think anybody really, with tools to self-care, to focus, to stand up and dust off and keep going, and to achieve some success while you are also working with your trauma. The problem with trauma is that often you feel so out of control, you feel so strongly that you're no longer in the driver's seat of your vehicle, that this sense of hopelessness and despair impacts on what you're already trying to do with the deeper layers of trauma. So what would it be like, I guess was the question I asked, if I could create something that while people were working on the deeper issues, it gave them tools to actually walk away and going, wow, I can reduce my stress. I can increase my ability for discipline, resolve, self-care. I've got tools and lessons for interacting with those that are close to me. And there's I think 5 lessons on navigating your way through the relationship territories. There's a letter I wrote in the book which a veteran can literally print out, hand to his wife, and it talks about his own territory, because many of them struggle to talk about the territory they've traveled through and finding words to express it without being or becoming emotionally very vulnerable. As this person said to me in America the other day in a call that we made, she said to me, I'd never realized where or how veterans operate. And she said, the one thing I love about your book, it's a tiny book, but it's densely packed with the most valuable information. So I guess my mission and my vision was, it's sitting there just behind me, was to create a little book. Hang on, I'll just turn around and get it. Was really, as you can see, it's a thin little book. And really was to create a little book you could stick in your pocket, if you've got a big pocket on the front of your jacket, or just throw it around in your car and just read it at odd moments. I find personally with really big books, I tend to avoid them, or I'll leave them at home because they're too big to carry around. and I'll read them piecemeal. I wanted something which really involved people in their own territory, and after reading the book, they came away not just with an awareness of how trauma works or combat or operational experience impacts on well-being, but they came away with tools that they could apply. This was a book that I wanted to empower people, to bridge the gap between what is often not said between veterans and the world around them. And also to do it in a way which uses operational terminology. So, when I talk to veterans about doing pull-throughs, or is your brain in OP mode or ambush mode? Are you, if you don't do a pull-through, you're going to have an AD, or you're going to have a stoppage, what a cock hook and look looks like. Now, for all of you who are not veterans out there, at the back of my book, I've actually explained all those terms so you can translate them into an understanding while you read the book. Anyway, so that was my vision. I'm powerfully driven to do what I can for veterans around the world. It's been, I don't know, for me, I guess the only way I can describe it is service. I think the most important thing, the veteran community, and I see so much of it, is their discipline and motivation to be of service to each other. And I think that's embedded in every single veteran. And I'm very fortunate in that my work with veterans in Australia, which is paid, my work in my other organization, I have the time to be able to give service to extraordinary men and women around the world. And so apart from my website and everything else embedded in that with the Instagram and the Facebook author group and the YouTube channel, nothing in there costs. And the idea was to create resources which didn't ask people to put their hands in their pocket. With the book itself, with organizations, as I've worked through different organizations in America and spoken to a number of people and had some really positive feedback, I provide the book at author cost, so it's no profit to me, but it's just getting this book out there. So I think more and more, when we have more and more veterans, more and more civilians pushing into the politics of what's not working to help veterans transition to civilian life and process their wounds, and also willing to step up and do something to help veterans create a positive, healthy journey, and what I say is allow their warrior to walk alongside their civilian. All right, well, thank you for listening, and looking forward to chatting to you next time. May your week ahead be a good one. Cheers, bye.